Welcome to Standards. This is our first episode where we explore intersectionality. Do you want to?
I just got mad weird.
Her interview mate came out. She was like, "Let me strike a pose, bitch. Let's do it." Yes.
No, I was like, fine. This is the first episode.
No, yeah, I'm so excited.
Yeah, no, you should get that in there. Bye.
Okay, now we're gonna have great bloopers. Okay, awesome. Welcome to Standards. This is our first episode where we explore intersectionality. Standards is a platform where we work to center the experiences of Black and brown women. So we talk about a lot of topics on here, a lot about double standards as well within our society and just within our own communities and our own friendships and families. So we're going to start off by kind of breaking down what intersectionality is. I know not everyone necessarily is familiar with that term, and yeah, we just kind of want to talk about it. So does anyone want to define it, or do y'all want me to do that? Because I can.
You can.
Okay, cool. So intersectionality is basically the concept that, actually, wait, hold on, because Rhonda was the person who first introduced me to intersectionality. I don't think she knows that, but when we were in the NAACP freshman year, she did a meeting on intersectionality, and I was like, I've never heard of this before. So,
oh, wow.
Right. Do you want to explain it? Because
Okay.
you might be better at it than me.
No, that's like really humbling. So intersectionality is basically, I was better at this 3 years ago. For sure.
No, it's okay.
So
Take your
it's
time.
when you consider all the different identities that a person can have and put them together and look at things through the perspective of multiple identities. So instead of looking at somebody as just Black, looking at them from a racial perspective, class, sex, gender, all sorts of different things that help create who they are and compound or alleviate their experiences and issues.
Right. That's a great, concise definition. And it was actually coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. I know that she was doing a lot of work at the time on a case. I'm not super familiar with the name, I can't remember, but on a case where a Black woman was being discriminated against at her place of employment, and they argued that she wasn't being discriminated against as a woman, and she wasn't being discriminated against as someone who was Black, so she wasn't being discriminated against at all. But that wasn't actually the case, and the things that were happening to her were very indicative of her being a Black woman, not just being a Black man or just being a white woman. You know, it was a compounded situation. So that's always what my head kind of goes to when I think about that term too. Do we all want to touch on that?
I actually want to talk a little bit about that case because it's always interesting to me because they didn't think that she was being discriminated against because she was a woman, because they had a white woman in secretarial positions in the office that it was. So they're like, well, we have these women here. I was like, what can I tell you? Well, they also were hiring her because she was Black, because they had Black men doing more custodial, janitorial jobs, if I'm correct, if I'm remembering the case correctly.
Right.
And so they were like, well, look at all these Black people, look at all these women. We're like, that's just unfortunate that you just didn't meet the qualifications.
Right.
That there just happened to be no Black women who met that standard. And they're like, really? Like, that's
Right. No one met that standard. No, yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people aren't even aware of, but like it's very real. We experience things differently based off of like who we're perceived as, and we can talk about racism and sexism and classism all day. We can talk about how they impact people on an individual basis, but I feel like we don't talk enough about how people who are not only a Black woman, but they're a Black trans woman, and they also live in lower class environments. Like, how is their life going to be much different than someone who is not necessarily in their shoes, in their position?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people forget that the main part of intersectionality is the multiplication or the multiplicative attitude that intersectionality has. It's not adding on another identity, it's multiplying the identities together, and then seeing how environmental forces, social forces, cultural forces then impact that person based on the multiplication of all of their identities.
Right. agree. So what do you guys feel like you experience anything on your, like, in your day-to-day life, or just do you have any anecdotes about any situations where you felt like your identities directly impacted, you know, how an outcome, you know, or a reaction of someone else? Do you feel like?
Yeah, so I don't know where the fuck I was trying to go with that, but thank God for Dominique understanding my gibberish because I don't know what the fuck that was.
Examples.
I have a small example. It's kind of funny to me. It's not like a horrible example, but in the office that I work in, their version of diversity is white Latinx women, white women, and then like a few black men sprinkled in between there, and then everyone else is mostly white.
Right.
Which isn't always a bad thing because Latinx is important to have that lens, but I'm the only black woman on my floor and I'm an intern. So, like, no one that's actually getting paid is a black woman there. I think there might be one or two, but they're on different floors than me. But it's funny because they just hired a new black guy there, and he's like, "It's good to see you." And I was like,
That, you know that feeling, you know that feeling. I feel like we're right here.
It's like, I see you. But it's like, I also wish that was a black woman at the same time.
Right.
But I'm like,
Right.
like, it's almost like we have to pick and choose those victories in intersectionality. It's like, okay, like, I get to see one part of my identity being like achieved and accomplished and represented, but I would love to see a black woman, or I would love to see someone like with a different sexual orientation, someone who might be disabled, or just someone who is truly representative of what we have in our country and the people that we see every day.
Right.
But it's just unfortunate because we're like, all right, this is a small victory, but it definitely could be better.
Right. No.
I just wanted to add that.
No, don't worry about it. We can bleep it out. We got you.
Thank you. I just feel that as Black women, or anyone who has more than one type of minority, often feels that they have to choose one in a given situation. So, for example, I think a few years ago there was a movie where it was supposed to be like a victory for Black people because they were telling the story about slavery in a new way that hasn't really been talked about or explored.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Birth of a Nation.
Yes. And at the same time, he was a rapist, I believe?
Yeah, he was accused in his college years of raping a woman. I think he ended up, the two other guys that were accused with him ended up being charged, but he was acquitted, and then he went on to, basically the woman went on to commit suicide, and people,
so horrible. But I feel that when the movie came out, it was this battle of, do I act like as a woman or do I act as a Black person? And it's like, so those two things kind of conflicted with each other, and I think that a lot of times in society wants us to pick one and just like deal with the consequences of whatever happens there and kind of push the other things back, but like that's just not realistic.
And I feel like that's a great point to touch on, because I feel like that every day in every day of my life, I feel like that I'm constantly having to choose between being supportive of Black and Latinx, culture, like just different things that will happen, and like of course we're supposed to support, but there are certain situations and circumstances where I'm like, I don't feel appropriate supporting this as a woman. Like, for example, music is like a great example. I listen to music 24/7. I love music. I love like the most problematic music sometimes, and it's hard, right? And it's hard to listen to because I'm like, okay, this beat really slaps, but they're talking about how women are bitches and hoes and we ain't shit, and they're also fetishizing light-skinned women or exotic women, and they're doing this, and that, and I'm like, I want to support, like I want to see us do well, and it's not just male rappers, like this goes on just throughout even like television and our social media, what we see, like it's all around media and every form of media that we get. It's like I want to see us win, but sometimes like are we winning at the expense of some of us losing? Like, and that's something that I feel like intersectionality tries to tackle and address in a way that normal or traditional activism doesn't necessarily acknowledge. And that's because of Black women. We have this term, we have these like intersections because Black women have been. Let's talk about it. They're the ones who advocate for us. They're the ones who are constantly like trying to change things in a way that no one else is really trying to do. Everybody, and let me just not go off the ramp. Everybody else is just trying to get, like, I feel like sometimes it feels like everybody else is just trying to get ahead to where they want, not necessarily get ahead to where we all need to be. And I feel like that's like the core of Black feminism is,
I think that's the problem. I think in a lot of other cases it's more about, I'm going to focus on me and make sure I'm getting where I'm supposed to be instead of making it so we're all getting to the same place at the same time. And I feel like it shows a very selfish part of humanity in that if I'm successful and other people aren't, it's their fault. It's more of an internal locus of control instead of an external locus of control, which is just a very negative way of thinking in terms of like how people can better themselves and grow as people.
I will say that I do think some of that is structural, because like if you look at how like discrimination laws, for example, have evolved over time, they really have stagnated, and I do know that a lot of things are kind of hard to prove or to track, which is a big problem with discrimination. But I think the US as a whole, if you look at like wage discrimination between various groups, there are just so many inequities, and a lot of times I think that because of the kind of like market structure we have, they don't really want to address that. And it's easier to hold up the status quo than to change things. But like that, I think, drives people to like more selfish behavior. If you are benefiting from something, it's hard to give that up in order to help somebody else.
This almost makes me want to go on my capitalism rant.
Let's do that.
Let's talk about it. I'm a socialist. Let's start there.
And capitalism.
It's the topic of the undeserving poor and the deserving poor. We talk about it a lot in some of our classes, but the idea that people who are poor like did something, they made bad choices.
Right.
It's that American dream mindset that we have. We're like, well, I pulled myself up from the bootstraps and I got a $50,000 inheritance and then I invested it in housing. And I don't understand why you poor bitches can't do the same thing.
But I feel like the American dream was a concept created to benefit white people. It wasn't a concept that was like, oh my God, you're Black. The American dream is for you. It was more of like, oh, you're Black, the American dream is not for you. You're a minority, the American dream is not for you. I feel like the American dream was created for white men. I feel like the American dream was like, you will be able to get a job, take care of your family, have a good life. Because at that point when the American dream was created, it was mainly men who were in the workforce. It was mainly white men who were in the workforce. So I feel like the concept of the American dream was just built on the idea that only white men could succeed in these circles.
And at that, class becomes a really, really important part of that, because when there were a lot of like white immigrants coming into the country, like they were not included in this dream. And sure, they definitely had more of a leg to stand on in terms of upward mobility. But it was still really difficult for them, and they still like had a lot of barriers to like moving up. But I do think that, well, my American dream, I guess, looks a lot different than, the wife,
The average, right.
the
nuclear family.
Exactly. Which is good. I think like talking about all of these different like identities and stuff has opened the door to like creating more opportunity, whether that's realistic in their current political climate.
That's a different story.
I'm like, run that back. Current.
I mean, we'll see, but I think that talking about it and like being engaged has like propelled like a lot of different people.
100%. Yeah, going off of that, like my idea of American dream is like very different, because first off, like the fact that I'm even in America is just a mess. Like what happened to get me here? But anyway, I just feel like let's unpack it.
Honestly.
But no, I feel like you said, like the American dream is something that was for white immigrants. It was something, or at the time, that's what they were, portraying. Like, come to America, like you can build a life for yourself, like you can make this amount of money, you can raise a good family, like you can get your kids a good education. But like our immigrants, the people coming from Caribbean, Africa, like anyone who looks ethnic,
Yeah.
Mexico, anyone who looks, right, anyone who is black or brown, we come to America and we're told, don't speak your language, don't look like what you look like, don't do
And
this
even
and that.
and I'll even say, like, even for the white immigrants that were coming here to this country, they were being lied to too.
Right, oh,
They were being
100%.
handed pipe dreams. You can take care of your family
You get a car.
on $10 a week.
Right.
Throwback to the jungle.
Yeah, the jungle, literally up in Sinclair. But like they were lying to them too. But I think like one of the major things that separated between race and class was like, I think if you go back to times of slavery when there were uprisings, the poor whites and the slaves, they were uprising together. But then they used race as a tool to divide them.
100%.
And then that idea, I guess that's where intersectionality then comes into play. Because now it's not only class that is acting against ethnic minorities, it's also their race and their nationality acting against them. So I think there's just a lot to unpack.
It is, and no, going off of that really quickly, I actually was talking about this the other day of how, especially Trump's base, they vote against themselves, essentially. Like, a lot of his base is poor whites, and in this country, like, if you're poor, you're poor. Like, money is money. If you're poor, you're poor. But because there's this fear-mongering and this idea of otherism that, racism and white supremacy have caused these people to take on, well, not everyone, but, his specific, group of people who are really passionate about his views, they're essentially voting for policies that are not going to help them. They're going to be a detriment to them at the end of the day, and they're doing that because racism is more important than your livelihood. And I feel like that's the kind of like racism that has seeped within our society, where we're not looking at issues of, okay, like economically there are people who are poor, like how do we help them? We're looking at it as like, no, there are black people who are poor and there are white people who are poor, because the white people who are poor always have that privilege and they use it to their advantage, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I feel like that definitely is a case where intersectionality has really had an impact on how just even classism in itself is so divided, and we can't even all come together to say, yeah, this is what we need as someone who's like I live very low class, like I grew up below the poverty line, like, and so as someone who knows what it's like to like not know like if there's gonna be groceries in your house for a couple weeks, you know what I mean? Like those kind of issues, like I know that they heavily affect you if you're poor. It doesn't matter whether you're white or black. Like if you don't have food, you don't have food. So why are we so pressed and concerned over keeping this, this hierarchy?
Yeah.
I do think that Republicans are very good at selling dreams to people.
Yes, they are.
I'm from West Virginia, and that is a very big coal state, or was. Coal and natural gas are some really big industries, and the whole state has been just abused by like upper class people who came in and like just destroyed natural resources. But they were able to, because they were selling, like they were giving people some semblance of like stability and like a dream.
Here's a job.
Yes, exactly. And as long as, I think, particularly in West Virginia where the population is over 90% white, so I don't know how much race played in like their decisions, but probably to some extent did. But he sold the dream of like maintaining the industries that were being largely automized, and like not really hiring new people. And like I think also like if you can sell somebody some notion of tomorrow is going to be okay, they don't really pay close attention to the details. You don't pay attention to like how they're going to cut Medicaid or SNAP or anything like that because you think you're going to be well enough that you don't need those things. And I think it's it's selfish, but it's like the way they market it is like this is our America.
Right. No, I agree, and it's sad because and if you ever watch Fox News, and people, like, I don't recommend it as a news source, but if you ever want to watch Fox News to understand the kind of rhetoric that's being told to, people who support those kind of like policies, it's basically just propaganda and fear-mongering for like 24/7. You can turn it on any hour of the day, and they're having a panelist discussion about like why, it's just constant fear-mongering. And at that point, when you have a base who's like willing to believe whatever you tell them, like they're scared, they're gonna go along with whatever you say if you tell them that it's gonna make their life better in some way, you know what I mean? So yeah. And I guess this kind of leads into the next question, like how well do you think media is representative of intersectionality? And I can actually start there. Let's start off this topic right here because everyone has been talking about this, and this is my 2 cents. So The Hate U Give is coming out soon, or it might have already came out, I'm not sure, and everyone has been asking me, are you going to come see it? Are you going to come see it? And my response always is, well, I would love to support, like it's a phenomenal story from what people have told me. However, like I saw what they did with the casting, and I was disgusted because I'm like, at this point, it's 2018, right from wrong, like you're gonna get dragged from hell and back, if you do some shit like that. And they casted Amanda Sterling, who she's a beautiful girl, whatever. I don't know much about her outside of the fact that she's like now the token black actress in all of Hollywood, but doesn't even represent like a majority of black women. You get what I'm saying? So like in that circumstance, especially when the character that she's playing was supposed to be a darker skinned black woman, they had to I know I was reading an article where they had to basically take the photo that they have on the front of the book. It's a dark-skinned, like, teenage girl, and they had to, like, change that for the movie because in the movie the girl, like, morphs, or that's what the article was saying, the girl morphs into Amanda, and they're like, well, you're about to just jump 20 shades? Like, I don't understand, so.
It's a really great book, by the way.
It's a great book. Yeah, I want to read it, and I want to see the film, but it's one of those situations where I'm like, how do I support without like?
I don't want to take away from Amanda because of the fact that she identifies as bi or queer or is a part of the LGBTQ community, and she is a black woman, and she has all of these multiplicative identities that intersectionality talks about. But I think also intersectionality also brings colorism into it as well.
Yes.
So if we're not just talking about race, we're talking about colorism and how even as a lighter skinned individual, you will have more privileges than someone who is of a darker complexion. And she seems like a very wonderful girl. She's a great actress, but at the end of the day, when stories of darker skinned women are portrayed in the media, it's so important for girls like me who grew up being made fun of because of my dark complexion. So when I see characters being replaced for a lighter skinned individual, they're just trying to make it more salient for mainstream media. And they tried to do the same thing with To All the Boys I Loved Before, because they tried to make the main character white, and they were like, we're not doing that to the story. And the only one of the production companies that picked it up was created by Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, because they understand the importance of having these kind of characters in the mainstream for children who are going to look at these things and say, I can see myself in this. I can see myself falling in love in these movies. I can see myself becoming a hidden figure and all these things because of the fact that we have this representation.
The whole thing, because I love good Twitter references, just reminds me of everything with Scarlett Johansson.
Oh my god!
Quick side note.
Multiple times though that she has gotten into things that she should not have.
too. But quick side note on that. That was actually the first video I ever filmed on like my official YouTube channel. It was about white feminism. I was like, Scarlett Johansson, like, what the fuck do you think this is?
Ain't for you.
This ain't for you. And it was because she had just recently come out against some other woman who had done some fucked up shit. And I was like, oh, we out here picking fights, but like, what are you doing? But anyway, finish on with
A message. No, but it's the tweet. It's like The Rock Johnson, like he's not gonna be playing this. Somebody quoted it like, "Oh my god, I can't believe Scarlett Johansson like was willing to give up a position as an Asian American woman."
yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
But she did it multiple times. She did it with Ghost in the Shell, and then she did it with another movie where she would be portraying a trans man.
Yes,
And
she eventually gave up the
yeah,
role.
but I'm
because she
like,
got
girl,
backlash.
you didn't learn from the first time around?
She didn't. She didn't. And
She's just trying to get that Black Widow check and just trying to buy her business.
she has to get that together because.
But do y'all think that these things are gonna happen regardless? So like with Amandla, they're just gonna find a new light-skinned Black woman to plug in. Because first it was Zendaya, and Zendaya's like, okay, I'm not having this shit.
But she was really like, yeah, I'm not having this
Yeah, and
shit.
then it was Amandla, so I'm like, who's next?
Yeah, I didn't know that was Zendaya first, but I'm not.
Oh, not in this movie, but I meant like, you know,
In
just like that, the it girl.
Oh, yeah, no.
I mean, she still is,
and
but
that's
she
what
is
I
that girl. Hey girl, if you're watching this.
That's what we see all the time is that now, especially right now, it's about like the four lighter skinned Black actresses being cycled through, teens at least being cycled through, and it happens with adults too, cycled through every Black narrative. And while I'm so happy to see, Black actors and actresses get jobs, it's even like, even for Latino people and like Latinx, me growing up, I didn't see that representation of Latinx people in the media in the way that I should have, like first off, most Latino people who are represented in the media are very fair and damn near white passing.
And those that are darker skin are typically portrayed as servers, maids, the stereotypical Latinx portrayal.
Right, 100%. So growing up, I didn't really have anything to look at, like, and it's hard when you're in those situations, especially like I'm mixed, so my father is Afro-Puerto Rican, but my mom is white, and I grew up in a white household, like my mom was a single mom, so everything I was learning about identity, I was learning from her, and I'm looking at her like, you don't represent, like you physically don't represent who I am, and I know when I step out of this house, I get treated differently than you do, and I think that was like a concept that was hard to kind of explain for a while, but with the media, that was like something that I wish at the time when I was growing up, like I had these portrayals of women who like looked like me, or at least had narratives that I felt like I could relate to. For example, when I first watched Jane the Virgin, I love that. And Gina Rodriguez, like at the time, I'm like, oh my god, like I'm obsessed with her. I don't really follow her much anymore, but watching that show, I was so like, oh my goodness, there's a Puerto Rican actress. She's playing the role of someone who's just like a very ambitious writer. Like this is like so different, and like I just was so overjoyed to see something like that. And I wish that we had more, shows and movies and film in the media, that did that for us. So, did you want to? No.
Well, now they have standards.
Right now we have standards. So every Thursday. Right. So and now I kind of have this, and like I said earlier when we talked about this is kind of a leading question. But what do you feel like about people who liken intersectionality to something like the Oppression Olympics, or that? Us compiling our identities, and that's just being more divisive, and we just need to focus on moving as a group, and if we move as a group, we'll get further. Because I hear that argument a lot, so if you guys want to touch on that a little bit, do you want to?
Not like she's ready to go off.
It just really annoys me when people take that perspective, because it's not about Oppression Olympics, who is more oppressed, I'm more oppressed, pay attention to me. I feel like people always portray it as this is an extra cry for help. I need extra help. No, we just need to pay extra attention to people with multiplicative identities, because if we don't look at it from a lens that is intersectional, something that is a part of their identity will be left out and will be negatively affected if you don't look at it from that lens. And I hate when people are saying it's an oppression Olympics. They're just trying to say that they're more oppressed than other people so that people will feel sorry for them, and we just have to help them. And you know, if we all just, I'm colorblind and I don't,
I hate that.
I'm colorblind and you know,
I'm gonna turn it black and white. And the rest of the episode we're colorblind anyway.
No, I jumped out.
no, honestly, like I'm just like, it's not about saying I'm more oppressed than you, and so I am. I've won the gold medal. It's saying that I have these multiple identities, and if they're not being addressed in a manner that will allow me to thrive, then they're being addressed in a manner that is going to guarantee that I fail. In some aspect of my identity, whether it's as a black woman, or whether it's as a queer black woman, or whether it's as a light-skinned queer black woman or a dark-skinned queer black woman. Like, all of these identities play a part in our day-to-day lives, whether people want to admit it or not.
I think it comes from a place of privilege to say that you should ignore your identity, because if your identity isn't something that you have to think about, that's a privilege. If you don't, aren't treated a different way, or face some sort of discrimination, or even just slight, little comments and things like that, then that's a privilege. And to say, oh, you shouldn't think about that because I don't have to think about that, I think it's so selfish. And I think that as we talk more about the intersections between all of our identities, I think that we've made a lot of progress, not only talking about it and seeing it in the media, but for social service programs and how to target certain communities, or just doing research and knowing more about what's going on in the lives of everyday people. That has been really important, and so I think that conversation needs to continue, and just be it doesn't have to happen to you to be accepting of it and open of it, and willing to listen to other people's experiences.
I think, sorry. No, the important phrase you said was everyday people. Because I'm a Douglas woman. I think you're a Douglas woman too.
Douglas
What else?
Douglas Residential College. What?
Right.
But so you guys have probably already taken knowledge and power. And for those of you who don't know, the Douglas Residential College here at Rutgers is one of the first women's colleges, I believe.
Celebrated 100 years this past year.
Yes, we stand living legends. Shout out to Babel Smith. And but since the school recombined, now Douglas Residential College is still something you can be a part of. You just have to take a course called Knowledge and Power, where we discuss intersectionality. And one of the things that we discussed in my section was how it plays in everyday situations. So urban planning, for example, if you go in the Livingston Student Center, there's a big pole in front of the ramp that is supposed to be used for handicapped people. So they can still fit, but it's definitely a tight squeeze. And don't let it be crowded in between classes. The pole's really a hindrance. So it's something like that where someone had said, this ramp is here for people who are wheelchair bound. Let's just put a big old pole for the picture of it. Or another thing was seating in lecture halls, for people who are overweight or have some type of disability. Again, they can't fit into the chairs that don't lift up. You know what I mean? It's just little things like that we take for granted because we don't think about that. We're fuck, somebody took my unassigned seat. I just gotta go sit. Yeah. Side note. Whoever takes my unassigned seat,
we'll do a story time about that. We'll do a whole episode about that. About assigned seats in college. I agree, and I think that's something else to touch on right there, is the fact that there's a severe lack of diversity within most work environments, and that's what allows situations to happen, like what the H&M situation happened. So about, I don't even know, like eight or 9 months ago, H&M released a hoodie with a black child on the hoodie, and it said "coolest monkey in the jungle," and immediately there was outrage, like, how dare you guys be so like
Ignorant.
It's so interesting that you
and-
bring that up because last night I was talking to Selma, who's another contributor.
the
to
clairvoyance
Standard, and she was talking about dog whistling and how certain words for different communities have different connotations.
Yes.
So for the black community, like whenever I'm in a classroom and a professor says thug, I wonder if they're thinking about a black man.
Right.
And if they're saying monkey, I wonder if they're thinking about black people and their portrayal as being a monkey and all these different things. Words that if they were said by another person of my race, or if they were said, even if they were said by someone by my race, or if they were said to someone of a different race, they probably wouldn't have even thought about it.
Right.
But for us, it's just like when we hear these words, they have a meaning for us,
Right.
and they don't have a meaning for other people.
Everyone else. And that's why I feel like in that situation, regardless of whatever you feel about H&M now, but I feel like
fast fashion.
I feel
We
like
can do another video on that.
we really could.
The fast fashion breakdown. Yeah.
No, for real. But I feel like in that situation, that was something that could have easily been avoidable if there was someone in the room when that final cut was being sent out, and someone was like, "Hold up, wait a minute, like this
don't look right.
this doesn't, something ain't right." And part of me wants to know whether there was no one in the room that said that, or if there was someone who was in the room who said it and they brushed them off and said, "Oh, I think you're thinking too far into this," or if there was someone in the room who wanted to say something but was afraid of the repercussions if they did. Because when you're a person of color in a work environment where everyone else is not, you feel like you cannot say certain things because it's going to make you be portrayed in a certain way. So
That's an episode coming up, right?
oh,
Diversity in the workplace.
yes,
I got some messages for y'all.
yes.
Right on that.
100%, yeah. So I feel like, yeah, even in those situations, and that's even like very applicable to like everything you just mentioned. Like when you don't have people there to actually be involved in these processes, like we're robbing ourselves. I feel like, for example, there was a tech story that came out probably last year, maybe earlier this year, about how like certain technologies do not work for people of color or people
Yes.
who look different.
Yes.
So,
Even here
Caucasian.
at Rutgers.
PlayStation 3, when the Dance Dance Revolution game came out, could not use that.
Oh my
It was-
goodness.
I was like,
No, but even here at Rutgers, whenever I'm like in the bathroom with the motion sensor for the sinks, if sometimes if I'm like this, it doesn't work, but as soon as I flip it to the lighter side of my hand, it works.
And
And I'm like, oh,
and
this is not motion sensor. It's a race sensor.
hold up, wait.
You just
did something right there.
Hashtag race sensitive.
That's gonna be the fucking clip for the promo. The shit isn't motion censored, it's race censored.
You just did some shit, yeah.
Thank you.
No, but for real, like, and that was the article. Basically, it was, or I saw a video briefly of like some black men who were like trying to dry their hands or get a paper towel in the bathroom, and when they would put their hand under it, it wouldn't release. But when they would have like a white person do it, it would release fine. And then they talked about how Apple's face recognition technology was not able to distinguish the difference between Asian women's faces. And that's something like, hello, how are you gonna have facial recognition when it can't recognize anyone who's not white? Like, you know, so.
Only white people can afford the iPhone. So.
Right, well, that's true.
Actually pulling up her iPhone.
Yes, girl.
She's like, you
Oh, we are official up here. No,
Class who?
We just fixed it. We fixed everything.
Yeah. Racism is cured.
It's okay.
Right, guys, I guess standards doesn't make
That's
sense.
right.
This is done,
Thank you.
y'all.
All right, so I'm gonna. All right.
No, but
It's done.
it's a wrap.
Cured racism.
No, but for real, yeah, like stuff situations like that, I'm like, if you're developing technology, like, wouldn't you, I don't know, me as a person, I'm like, if I'm developing something, I want it to be of use to everyone.
Yeah.
Because if it's a piece of technology, like, it's supposed to be pretty neutral in nature. Like, why shouldn't my laptop turn on because I'm not white? You know what I'm saying? Like,
because they don't want you to use it.
why exactly?
You don't want you to have it. It's like with that Michael Kors. They were like, Michael Kors is buying Versace, and everyone on Twitter was like, Versace is going downhill now. The Negroes have it. they're like Versace is going to be in Marshalls now. It needs to be in Marshalls. Versace. Oh, excuse the fuck out of me, Versace.
She did a video. She was like, it's Versace.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you learn something new every day.
See, that's why they don't want black people to have it.
Because we know the shit, right? We know the secrets. No, yeah, I feel like that. Sorry, I definitely had something to go off of that, but now I
No, you're right.
We just moved past it. But
Just cut that out.
right.
Oh, that's a good segue if we talk about intersectionality in terms of fashion and
Right.
beauty.
Right.
Just because.
That's where I was going.
Oh.
I remember.
Yeah, because like
Clairvoyant.
even clairvoyant jumped out. Even with like beauty standards, the difference in again complexion, but also body type, not just like weight, but height and like conditions. Just like even with Aerie, I love Aerie, and I've always shopped at Aerie, and I've seen how they've grown as a company from where they used to be and where they are now, and how they've become more inclusive and have started to include different women who have these intersectional identities, women of color who also have illnesses, or women who just have illnesses or who have different body types or who aren't the typical portrayal of beauty in the mainstream media today.
Right. No, and I love when I see companies do stuff like that. For example, Target. Target. They started like they kind of rebranded themselves, and now all the photos of like the women up are like not conventionally thin women, and like they have a lot of plus size women, a lot of women who are just like more so the average body type, and like all of those kind of things are important because as a little girl looking at stuff like that, it makes you feel much, well, for me at least, it may have made me feel much more comfortable about my body because growing up I was not as thin as the white girls I went to school with. I was just never, I just was never that. And like unfortunately over years, like I developed eating disorders, and that's a whole different thing, but and that's like a whole different episode we'll talk about one day. But being able to see people who like represent your body type, even like that's very powerful, and people underestimate how like
Especially in
What was that?
it's October. It's so I thought that was anyway. I think particularly in the arena that Aerie is in terms of it being an underwear lingerie company and showing women in what is perceived as a vulnerable state, I think is amazing because we're showing these different body types, and I'm happy that more companies are moving towards showing these body types because I think it's really important. Like even some of the swimsuit brands that I follow online, they still have their typical
fashion over there.
they still have their typical like, you know, slim, thick with decorative. I'm not gonna do that. But they still have those typical portrayals of like really skinny women showing their bathing suits, or women who are of a more voluptuous body type. But you know, we're starting to see where it's becoming more inclusive, like Lahana Swim and like even Frankie's Bikinis. Like they, even if they don't always show those type of women, they're starting to move more towards that and showing stretch marks and showing what women truly look like on a day-to-day basis.
I feel like, well, then we can just really, you know, kind of wrap it up here then. We kind of went through a lot of topics. I hope anyone who was watching and listening learned something about intersectionality.
Oh, I was just thinking, do we have to do introductions?
Oh yeah, we're gonna do introductions like another day. I'm gonna film each person's individually, but yes, this is Rhonda, this is Dominique, and this is Chanel, and like I said earlier, I am Jocelyn. And yeah, I'll have all of our information in the description box below. Anything that they want me to put down there will be there. Also, go ahead and follow us on all of our social media, Standards TV on IG and also on Twitter. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel and look out. Yeah, like this.
Do the little bell thing.
Right.
You know how Jackie Adams, when I heard videos, she's like, I don't know where it is. It's over here.
It's somewhere. It's right. It's right. It's over somewhere.
You know where it is.
Yeah, y'all see it. Y'all see it.
But it used to be, didn't it used to be like an old YouTube, like throwback YouTube? It used to be like on the left.
Yeah,
or on the right.
It was
on the right.
Yeah, it was on the
top
right.
right.
It was on the right.
I was a cable kid.
See, I've been making YouTube videos since I was like 10.
You want to use the internet? The internet?
Internet.
The one
with dial-up.
Yeah.
With the desktop in the basement.
So yeah, it was me in cyberspace and
Right.
Arthur.
Wow, that's a mood. So yeah, go ahead and subscribe, and also check out our website as well. It's standards-tv.com. We have a bunch of amazing content on there. We'll have videos. We'll have more videos and web series on this channel as well. They're gonna have their own little series. We're in the process of solidifying that, and they were roommates is what it's gonna be called. So look out for that. Also, there's gonna be op-eds and lifestyle pieces and artist features up on our site as well and on our social media. So I really recommend following. If you're watching and you're in the Rutgers area, you go to school with me and you want to be involved in some sort of way, whether it's a panelist, whether you want to film, whether you want to photograph, whether you want to write, whether you just want to be featured as an artist, let me know. Go ahead and email us at standardspodcast@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram. And yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for you guys joining me with this.
Of course.
I'm so happy. I feel like this set a great, path for what we're going to be doing next. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next Thursday. Is what we'll do.
Turn up Thursday.
Bye. Yeah, Thursday. Turn up Thursdays. Hey, okay, yeah. So we'll see you next Thursday. Bye.
Bye. Ooh, harmony.
Look at you in the suit. Were y'all smelling that?
Yeah.